Good evening and welcome. This is a very special occasion here at Freedom Hall because we're celebrating International Women's Day. And Freedom Hall is the home of radical women and our sister organization, the Freedom Socialist Party. And first of all, I want to acknowledge our speakers. Emily Yamasaki, we have Lisa Davis, Fatin Jarara, and Angie, Galindo, and Mariana, Merlos. Before we hear from the speakers, I'm going to share with you some of the conditions and events that brought about International Women's Day into existence. International Women's Day is an official holiday in 25 countries, but not in the United States. At least not yet. Maybe we'll get there soon. And why is this day so important? It's because women have come a long way, but it's also important because we're recognizing the struggles that are still going on around the world for women's rights. We're also recognizing the fact that in this entire history of women struggling, each one of our struggles has fed off the other struggle. So we're learning from these different struggles. We're moving forward because somebody else moved forward. It has its origins in the whole industrialization that was going on and women going into the factories. And it also has its origin here in the United States as a result of a demonstration that happened down in Union Square. After the Civil War, a lot of women in the United States were going into the factory, demanding higher wages and better working conditions. But for a long time, there was no effect. But by the 1900s, however, this began to change. And you saw the immigrant community, even though they spoke a lot of different languages, they still had one demand, that they were going to organize, fight, and win. By the turn of the century, the 1900s, strikes, sick-outs, and other work stoppages were in full swing. And the following 2 decades, that's the 1910, 1920, are filled with some of the most fiercest battles in labor because women were at the center of those. And one of the examples happened on March 8th in 1908 when 15,000 women garment workers staged a demonstration in New York City at Union Square for economic and political rights and unionization. And it was witnessed by a German socialist, Clara Zetkin, who was also an anti-war activist and a feminist, and she was no stranger to to being involved in militant struggles. She was deeply influenced by what she saw. So in 1910, at the International Socialist Conference held in Copenhagen, she moved that March 8th become an International Women's Day in honor of the American working women. And in 1911, 1 million European women and men marched in the first coordinated International Women's Day demonstration. So we can say, like May Day, International Women's Day came about because of the struggle in New York City and other parts of the Northeast where garment workers were fighting. One of the important things about this period, and even today, is that U.S. working women have been in the forefront of strikes. In 1909, there was the uprising of the 20,000, and one banner at that march said, "We are starving while we work. We might as well starve while we strike." The bosses at the time tried to hire black women to be scabs, but they wouldn't do it because some black women were already involved in the union, and in New York they were prominent in both the union and the strike. Equally famous was the 1912 textile worker strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, better known as the Bread and Roses strike, which women won the equal rights with men in every aspect of that strike. So from those early efforts to the present day, women have been involved in labor and also in many other struggles. Even when difficult times existed, such as during the Reagan period, there was the women that kept the militancy of labor unions alive, such as the Watsonville strike, where cannery workers that was led by women, which out in California were leading those strikes, like the domestic workers and the laundry workers down in the South were leading those strikes. And also we saw a women's role in Wisconsin, and we saw a women's role in the Chicago teacher strike. But International Women's Day just isn't about labor. It also has another aspect, and that deals with socialism, and also in terms of changing the course of history. And one particular example, on International Women's Day in 1917, Russian women textile workers began a strike for bread and peace in St. Petersburg in response to the death of over 2 million Russian soldiers in the ongoing World War I. In a joint protest with women who were protesting food shortages, they faced armed troops. Taking a hold of soldiers' rifles, they called, "Put down your bayonets and join us." And soon 90,000 protesters were in the streets. The troops refused to fire, the Tsar was forced to abdicate, and the Russian Revolution was born. And that was women that started that Russian Revolution. There's other examples in the Iranian Revolution, when women bank clerks refused to allow the puppet of the United States, the Shah of Iran, to send his money out of the country. They stopped that on International Women's Day. So the money never left the country, but the Shah did as a result of that. And also in South Africa, on their Women's Day in 1954, women marched against apartheid pass laws. Those were the laws that required blacks in South Africa to march with passbooks. And those women that marched that day ushered in the modern day movement against apartheid. This year, in Iraq, women protested against the draft law approved by the Iraq cabinet that would permit the marriage of 9-year-old girls and automatically give child custody to the fathers. In Istanbul and in Beirut, both cities held marches against domestic violence, where 2,000 plus marched in each city. In Istanbul, the women were met with a huge police presence as they were marching, because they were attacking the government's policies toward women that have led to increased poverty. In Taiwan, 80,000 marched to demand the government abandon nuclear power. In Spain and Dublin, both countries marched for abortion rights and against the austerity measures that were particularly harmful to women. Because right now in Spain, there is also unemployment rate of 26%. So our past is telling us, and our present is also telling us by what our speakers are going to talk about, that we have to organize and organize to win. So that is why this forum and discussion tonight is so important. So now it's the time to hear from our speakers. The first speaker is Fatin Jarara from Al-Awda, New York, the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, and supporter of the campaign to drop U.S. government charges against Arab American activist Rasmina Odeh.
My name is Fatin Jarara, and I am from Al-Awda, New York, Palestine Right to Return Coalition. I first want to thank Radical Women for extending an invitation to Al-Awda, New York to talk at this important event. And I also want to acknowledge Radical Women for their continued support and alliance with Al-Awda, New York. I first want to talk a little bit about Rasmina Odeh. If you haven't heard of her, you'll walk away today having learned something about her and feeling why it's important to talk about her. Because I think what happened to Rasmina is something that could happen to anyone, unfortunately, especially people who work in certain struggles. Rasmina Odeh is a Palestinian American, and she immigrated to the United States many years ago. She was arrested in her home on October 22nd of last year because of charges of immigration fraud. Because Rasmina did not mention that she had been arrested and detained by the Israeli government. And if you know anything about Israeli procedure and Israeli way of trial and just law, you would know that many Palestinians, would be arrested and detained indefinitely. In fact, if you speak to any Palestinian, you will find that most of them, if not all of them, will tell you that they have members in their families, if not, members in their families, people that they know, that have been arrested and have been detained indefinitely. So this is not something uncommon. This is something that they are subjected to on a daily basis. In my own family, I've had tons of family members that have been arrested and detained indefinitely, many times without any charge. just because. And I think of it like, if you want to think about maybe how it would be here, I think of stop and frisk in our communities, right? People of a certain demographic or that fit certain criteria get stopped and frisked in our communities for absolutely no reason besides them fitting a certain profile. So this is something that happened to Rasmia. Rasmia, besides the fact that she actually was a person who was instrumental in resistance against the Israeli occupation, even if she hadn't been, she still could have been arrested and detained, as many people have. So like I said, this is not something that is foreign to Palestinians. So she did not mention on her immigration application that she was detained by Israel over 45 years ago at the time of her arrest. I think her arrest happened in the 70s. So yes, it's been a very long time. Like I said, people get arrested and detained without charge and just waiting around sometimes to be released. And those are what we call political prisoners. And I invite you guys to take a look into many political prisoners. I'm sure you've heard about many hunger strikes. And the reason why they happen is because, you know, these are people who were going about their daily lives. Right now, the struggle in Palestine and resistance form is usually very nonviolent. So you have a lot of the protests that happen on Fridays in Belain, for example, the town that has been split apart by the wall. You have what is called the Sun Gate, Bab al-Shams. That's the town that was resurrected by Palestinians in West Bank territory that is supposed to be for them under any circumstance, and according to everybody in the international community. You have Bedouins who are always like facing being removed and their villages being demolished because Israel doesn't recognize these villages in the Negev. So, you know, they're constantly, facing their villages being resurrected. Well, not resurrected, I should say, demolished. So, this arrest for Rasmia Awda is believed to be widely connected to the FBI repression against Arab Americans. And actually, there's particularly 23 cases that happen in Chicago, in Minneapolis, and in Grand Rapids in Michigan, where 23 Arab Americans had FBI raids, were basically like detained and questioned and facing trial. And there is a key person in this, Barry Jonas, who is the U.S. Attorney Assistant, who's helped put, in addition to these 23 Arab Americans that he's targeted, he's also helped put the Holy Land 5 charity leaders behind bars under, false allegations. But of course it's worked, and this is believed to have led to Rasmia's arrest. Rasmia, it's not like she was this person who was doing anything or even not really contributing anything good to the community in Chicago. She is the Associate Director of Arab American Action Network, and she won Outstanding Community Leader Award, the Outstanding Community Leader Award from Chicago Cultural Alliance in 2013, so only last year, probably only a few months before she got arrested, for work with Arab American women and other groups in the local community. Now you might be asking what happened to Rasmia. Rasmia had a trial or I think it was a hearing in November 13th, I believe, of last year. And she was indicted. So that means that she has to go to trial. And she faces, I believe, 10 years in prison and possibility of being deported. So this is a huge deal. And this is something that we see on a common occurrence, because it's not something that really is being directed towards Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans, but we see in many communities. And this is very important for us to know about these cases and band together, because this should not be happening. I can speak on behalf of Al-Awda, and I can tell you, if you haven't heard, Al-Awda, sometimes faces such things like basically intimidations by authorities, or even people who we are not sure but we think have help basically to intimidate us. We've been sued and we're currently facing a lawsuit right now. We have even just college students who are very active in Student for Justice in Palestine groups, who are always intimidated by campus officials, or even just they don't know if they should continue doing their work because they have a lot to wager sometimes. So this is a very important case. What I would like to ask you guys in terms of Rasimia's case is to continue following the case, and when she does go to trial, I would like to see us all there. This is the least we can do. She would be in Chicago. I think that's around there. If you look at the Stop FBI Repression, that's the group that has been working very closely, and actually she's being represented by, I thought I wrote his name down, a lawyer from the National Lawyers Guild. So I'm sure that if you contact the National Lawyers Guild or the Stop FBI Repression Coalition, you'll be able to follow up more on Rasimia's case and see how much you can help and what you can do. And especially if you have, family and friends out there, it would be amazing if we can all be there for her. And like I said, this is not something that would only happen to this one individual, and it doesn't matter that she has been instrumental in the struggle and resistance against Israeli occupation, which is, by international law, even if we care about international law, is her right to struggle and resist against Israeli occupation. The second thing I want to talk about is the role of Palestinian women in today's struggle for Palestinian rights. So this is, when I was sitting down and trying to think of key examples that we have, I was thinking that if you think of any form of resistance, I think just being a woman in Palestine in itself, just being a Palestinian one and being a Palestinian woman is a form of resistance in Palestine, because you're walking around, like I said, and you could be detained for no reason. You could be, assaulted for no reason, harassed for no reason, at checkpoints and whatnot. The stories that you hear about women giving birth at checkpoints are real, they're real. And there have been women that have died at checkpoints waiting to cross, and these are real stories, okay? So this is a way of resistance, I think, and probably the most important way for women. We have women that farm, and farming is a huge, way of life over there, even if you're not making any money out of it. Not a single Palestinian family, not farms. There is always something to do, seasons of fruit, and there's like they're always looking forward to different seasons of different things. So olives, they just can't wait till the olives come out, and so that they can pick the olives and they can take them to the presses and make olive oil. And they don't just make olive oil to do zait and za'atar and like different the breakfast spread. They make oils and they make soaps from the olive oil, and they make creams from the olive oil, and they really rely heavily on some of these products. And of course, there's things like figs and dates and almonds, and these are very important. And you'll hear, like, if you have friends there and family, you'll hear them each year saying, oh, it's the season of whatever, and they're very excited about this, and this is, and I mention this because, it's fun for them, but many times they don't even have access to their lands that they've bought, their lands that they own, their lands that might be maybe a few kilometers away from a settlement, right? Or very close to a settlement where access to their lands are very, very difficult. Or there's a checkpoint all of a sudden, like a sprung up checkpoint. So this hampers on production and hampers on harvest season for them. You have political prisoners, females, including ones who've given birth while in detention. So when I say political prisoners, I mean those, I would imagine any Palestinian in an Israeli jail is a political prisoner, because most likely, they have done nothing wrong. And if they, according to Israel, if they've done something wrong, it's probably because they try to resist the occupation, the illegal occupation. So like I said, there have been many women and children even that have been in Israeli jails, and some women make it so that they give birth. There are women who have their husbands smuggle their sperm so that they can give birth and continue, without their husbands, who might never be released from Israeli prison. Demonstrations, rallies for prisoners against Bedouin village demolitions, like I've said. As early as 1884, we're demonstrating against the first Jewish settlement. 1884. So it's not 1948, it's 1884. And women were at the forefront of demonstrations against these settlements. I want to say that despite all of these obstacles, that amazingly, literacy rate among women is over 90% in Palestine. That literacy rate is 3.5 times more than men, FYI. There's also has been a rise in labor force, though the male percentage is still 4 times higher, and there is still a gap in wages, not something that's unfamiliar to us here even. I'm saying all this because I want to paint a picture of how Palestinian women are progressing in Palestinian society, despite all of the obstacles, including the Israeli occupation. Thank you so much.
After all of the 4 speakers, we will have discussion, and we'd love to hear all the comments from everybody. The next speaker is Lisa Davis. She's with Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparation. She's a health activist fighting racist reproductive health policies and medical industrial complex. She's also a supporter of the coalition organizing to free domestic violence survivor Mirza Alexander.
Yes. I am here because of the love and the strength of every black woman that has ever had anything to do with my heritage or my lineage. And I am so proud to have come through the wombs of all of those black women. I stand with them, I stand because of them, and if I could choose 100 times over, lifetime after lifetime, and as a Buddhist, we do believe in reincarnation, I would choose to enter exactly as I have through the womb of black women. I love all of them, I support them, and definitely my mother, the one I know most personally, and my grandparents. So, my grandmothers, I should say, so I just have to say that. And then, lastly, I also want to say I think it's time that we begin to recognize another group of people in terms of the revolutionary struggle that oftentimes are not talked about. And I think it's very important that we do begin to talk about them, because when we don't, we are not giving recognition to a whole other way of life and a whole other way of doing things that really is not serving us well. And I want to give homage to the medical revolutionaries, the ones who are called witch doctors and all of that, because they did tremendous work. They often prevented a black person or an enslaved person from having to go to a doctor who had no respect for them whatsoever and who would experiment on them unmercifully. And also they played major parts in revolutions and things of that nature. So I stand on all the shoulders of these people, and I'm glad to be here tonight. And the thing that I really want to talk about is the issue of health and what is called healthcare. And I think that the liberation movement, especially the black liberation struggle, but I would say the liberation struggle in general, while they've been very, very, very good about being on the forefront of what goes on in terms of labor and what goes on with police brutality and the social injustices of this world, they have been sort of dormant or not as active as they need to be in terms of what happens with the medical industrial complex, which has proven to be as racist, as ruthless, and as vicious as its police counterpart. And so I really, with that knowledge and with having learned about some of the things that I was very fortunate to learn about in terms of natural healing, in terms of energy medicine, when I joined the Black is Back Coalition, they had organizations or working groups for every other, social avenue that was going on, education and things of that nature. And I said, we need to also have something with healthcare. And nobody argued with me against that. Everybody supported that. And so the goal of the Black is Back Coalition Healthcare Working Group is to establish an advocacy network of revolutionary people who are involved in healthcare, be it naturopathic or allopathic, and who are committed to challenging the paradigm of the current racist for-profit medical system. And whereas I can't see that well, I changed my contact lenses. But anyway, whereas we have been on the forefront of talking about police brutality and those issues, we must become equally as vocal about the devastating effects of structural racism in medicine. And it is also very important for us when we are challenging this and when we are talking about healthcare to really redefine what that is. The current system known as modern medicine, it has basically been what has given scientific authority to the legitimacy and pathology of the goals of white oppression and domination. Now, in terms of how this relates specifically to black women, has anybody ever heard of Marion Sims? Do you know who that person is? Well, he is upheld very highly. He is upheld in very high esteem by the modern medical establishment. He is considered the father of modern day gynecology. Yes. He was somebody who had used black women who had been enslaved for experimentation. And he would perform operations on them without anesthesia. He performed frontal lobotomies on children. And when you were enslaved, you had a steady stream of people upon which you could practice and I guess perfect your medical modalities. And so that is who is considered the father of modern day gynecology, who is upheld and who is praised. So is it no wonder when we look at that we have statistics that reads things such as where white women get breast cancer at a higher rate than black women die from it at much faster rates. In 2000, only 2 minutes? Okay, I got to get more into what I was here to talk about.
You can do it.
Okay, I'm going to have to do this really fast. In 2001, the National Medical Association says that racism is at least in part responsible for the fact that African Americans, since arriving in as slaves, have the worst of all health care conditions, no matter what. And they say that is in large part due to racism. But again, when we talk specifically about women's rights and women's health and reproductive issues, that is very, very important. The irony of all of this is that during slavery, black women were forced against their will to produce children, regardless of whether they wanted to or not, because the more children they produced, that put a dollar amount on for their plantation owner, for the person who called himself the slave master. But after slavery, quote unquote, ended, then you had this population of people who you no longer had the same value that they had to you as before, and so you had to find a way to try to do away with them. After slavery had ended, that's when we saw the rise of the prison industrial complex, because you had to have a place to house these people and to criminalize them. But also began the system of population control. and things such as forced sterilization and things of that nature. And people might say that, okay, that was in the past. Like, I just want to read just one thing very quickly about forced sterilizations, because thousands of black women were wrongfully sterilized against their will, but not just black women. Between 1940s and 1970s, more than a third of women of childbearing age in Puerto Rico were sterilized. Also at that same time, about 25% of indigenous women were also sterilized. But what do we have today? We have organizations such as Planned Parenthood, and certainly I am for Planned Parenthood. But I certainly do not support that organization, and I do not think that Planned Parenthood should be about compromising your health. I do not think that Planned Parenthood should be about pushing deadly birth control methods on people of color as they are doing. And not just Planned Parenthood, but you have the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control. How many of you have heard of Norplant? Yeah. Which was something that was inserted in a female, and Medicare would pay for this to be inserted. However, if they wanted to remove it, they didn't cover that. And they had to, yes, they had to take that out themselves. They had to find a way to get it out. It had deadly side effects. Another one, and I work with the Rebecca Project, another deadly form of birth control that's being promoted today, that's being pushed today, not just in terms of the black African American society, but worldwide, and that is Depo-Provera. I would just like to briefly read to you some of the side effects of Depo-Provera. It causes significant bone loss density, blood clots in arms, legs, lungs, and eyes, stroke, bleeding irregularities, weight gain, ectopic pregnancies, and it significantly increases a user's chance of not just contracting the HIV virus, but of transmitting it. They have done studies. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hired people to do studies about this and confirmed that in all of the cases that they examined, I'm up, one more minute, that it significantly increases a user's chance of contracting the HIV virus. In a 2011 study involving 7 African countries and over 3,000 participants, researchers led by Renee Heffron at the University of Washington in Seattle reported that women who used Depo-Provera were twice as likely to acquire as well as transmit HIV/AIDS. And yet this is Depo-Provera is being pushed and promoted in the African communities. Whereas African American women or African women are about 84% of the users worldwide of Depo-Provera, European women are only 0.7% to 2% of its users. Yes. When we hear about AIDS devastating the continent of Africa, and we hear about how AIDS is ravishing that continent, and how we also hear about the rise of AIDS in the African American community, I don't think it's any coincidence at all that the rise of AIDS within our community directly correlates to the usage of Depo-Provera and the pushing of Depo-Provera into these countries. And just one other thing I would like to end with, South Africa is considered the country with the largest rate of AIDS in the world. It is also the country with the highest usage of Depo-Provera. So, what do we do about this? It is so important, first of all, for us to get the information out there about what is going on. We should have to demand that they use safer birth control methods. There is something called the symptothermal method, which has like a 0.4% chance of becoming pregnant with that. That involves the rhythm method, the calendar method, a way of measuring your temperature. All of these are safe. It is also a way of educating women about our bodies. These are safe methods. They are not promoted. They are not being taught. And that is inexcusable. It is absolutely inexcusable. I will encourage everybody to please try to learn more about the Black is Back Healthcare Working Group and the Black is Back Coalition as well. It is important that we build a network of healthcare activists, a network of people to challenge what is currently put in our community as healthcare, a network of people to say, no, this is wrong, a network of people to take each other by the hand. This is not going to be televised. It's not going to be. But there are so many things that we can do. And we have to hold these organizations such as the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control and Planned Parenthood, which is really about planned population control. We have to hold them accountable. It is inexcusable to push death in any form in our communities. And the medical profession really gives them the license to do that. Thank you so much.
Our next two speakers are Angie, Galindo, and Mariana, Merlos. And they're speaking from Yo Soy 132 Nueva, Newark, which is a campaign to free Indigenous leader Nestor Salgado, who is imprisoned in Mexico. And they do meet here at Freedom Hall.
We are here in solidarity with an Indigenous leader and political prisoner, Nestor Salgado. And Nestor Salgado is a naturalized U.S. citizen who grew up in the small indigenous village of Olinala, Guerrero, Mexico. And she is a mother of 3 children and grandmother of 4. And she moved to the United States in 1991 at the age of 20. She was working as a maid, nanny, and waitress, and she split her time between Olinala and Renton, Washington, where she lives with her family. Over the past 4 years, she made numerous trips to deliver clothing and supplies to the poor residents of her hometown. During this time, Nestora witnesses increasing poverty and the rise in violent crime as well as political corruption. She witnesses kidnapping, extortion, rape, and killing, and all kinds of crimes against the community, committed for groups of organized crimes, drug cartels, and federal forces with total impunity. This led her to become a community activist for the human rights of Indigenous people, and she was working hard to develop the leadership of Indigenous women and to empower them to stand up against domestic violence and child abuse in Guerrero and neighboring parts of Mexico. As a result, she was elected in October 27, 2012, as an organizer and coordinator of a local armed Indigenous police force, with initial support of the Governor Angel Aguirre, and officially authorized by the Mexican Constitution, Article 2nd, and Aguirre State Law 701, that uphold the right of Indigenous people to form their own local law enforcement. Its officers formed patrols and set up checkpoints to defend residents against organized crime and narco cartels operating with impunity due to the complicity of local authorities, including the mayor. They also addresses gender issues like domestic violence and crime and killing stopped 90% with the inauguration of the community police. The willingness of the population to end impunity and injustice and the omission of the government to end these crimes was the factor that triggered the population to form their own police. And not only in Guerrero, but also in the most of the state of the Mexican Republic. On August 21st, 2013, local officials retaliated by arranging Salgado's arrest and trumped up on bogus kidnapping charges and sending her 2,000 miles away to a maximum security federal prison in Tepic, Nayarit, Mexico. This arrest occurred after community police officers exercised their legal authority to arrest the town sheriff Armando Patron Jimenez for tampering with evidence relating to the assassination of 2 local farmers and stealing property from the deceased. Previously, as coordinator of the Olinala Community Police, Nestora issued a press release giving details of the mayor's ties to organized crime and government corruption in Guerrero. She angered a local official who falsely charged her with kidnapping of 5 people, including 2 teenagers, and she was arrested by military forces and Marines and sent to a maximum security federal prison, where she's suffering now military-style torture and she's deprived of badly needed medication and exercise, and she's not allowed to communicate with other inmates, and she's allowed a 5-minute phone call and a visit from her sister every 15 days. She has no access to newspapers, to magazines, television, and cannot receive letters from her husband. She's limited to sunlight for only 1 hour each week. She has denied drinkable water and kept it away in her cell 24 hours a day by artificial bright light. Thereby, she lost consciousness of time. So far, she has denied due process of law for her defense. Those deplorable conditions are a violation of human rights. And the top federal and state prosecutors have been sabotaging Nestora's rights to effective legal representation. Nestora Salgado is being punished for being a strong female leader in her hometown, where the local, state, and federal authorities have become oppressors of her people and all those who denounce government ties to organized crime. When organization questions government officials, the government immediately create false stories like kidnapping, killing, criminal conspiracy, weapon trafficking, and other crimes, as well as defamation through media campaign. The widespread emergency of community police in Mexico poorest areas has led to attempt by officials to suppress them through arbitrary arrest, death, threat, and denial of social services and benefits to their supporters. That is why Nestora and 12 additional community police were arrested. Since then, the federal government has maintained a military occupation of Alla to intimidate other residents and punish those who are exercising the right to protest Salgado's imprisonment. And recently, military occupation has expanded around Guerrero to prevent grassroots organizations from forming their community police. And this February, 20 indigenous people in Guerrero were killed by the militaries. This criminal Mexican government orchestrated plan in collusion with the organized crime and drug cartels has the objective to maintain the social destabilization to drive the poor and indigenous people off their land in order to hand it over to large-scale international mining corporations to extract gold, silver, and other natural resources of the nation. This is why we are here today to point out the horrible injustice of Nestor Salgado case, and we will not stop protesting until Nestora Salgado is free and back with her family.
That's right.
On last September, we received an urgent call from a desperate person in a hunger strike calling for solidarity and help to make public the unjust detention of his wife, Nestor Salgado. We all joined this struggle to free Nestora in collaboration with the Freedom Socialist Party and the Radical Women Organization and other organizations here in New York. Her imprisonment and the arrest of the members and the leaders of the Authentic People's Movement has been obligated to raise after several killing, mutilating, and people has been dying on transnational glory. Although the police was recognized by the governor and the state of Guerrero, the circumstances of her arrest, incarceration are still a mystery on official documents because we fear that the Mexican National Human Rights Commission works in confabulation with the Mexican corrupt authorities. So they have failed to give us an official status on her, unfortunately, conditions. This campaign is growing lately. Protests have taken place in consulates around U.S. cities, here in the United States, on 5 different cities, on different government offices in Mexico and in the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Australia, France, Japan, England, Cadiz, and Brazil. On different events, the campaign has gotten over 120 endorsers in NYC and different more all over the world. The Committee on Guerrero and Seattle passed a resolution calling the Congressional Black Caucus to urge the State Department to take immediate action to secure Nestor Salgado's release. Legal petitions have been filed within the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. Multiple organizations and prominent individuals have had dozens of television and radio interviews, as well as being in numerous newspaper articles in the United States and Mexico to expand this campaign. And today we're asking for your help to keep the pressure on members of the Washington State Congressional Delegation to urge Secretary of State John Kerry to intervene on Nestora's behalf, because the increasingly punitive and exaggerated charges being brought against her and her people and Guerrero and different states have been prosecuted by Mexican governments and authorities. We're asking you to to please join us on the petition online to free Nestor Salgado. We're looking forward to create actions that are gonna be taking place in San Francisco and Seattle and Mexico, and also here we're organizing like what the action is going to be here in New York City. To join, to get information about that, you could join the Facebook page, Yo Soy 132 Nueva York on Facebook, or Yo Soy 132 New York on Twitter, or write us to Yo Soy 132 ny@gmail.com. Well, thank you very much. Angie is gonna read you like a letter that Nestor Salgado sent on the celebration of the International Women's Day.
In commemoration of International Women's Day, Nestora Salgado sends a message to all women. I could not be indifferent to what is happening to my neighbors and the people of Olinala. Abuses by delinquents occur daily. We could no longer live in peace. We could not leave our homes, go to work, or open a business. We could no longer send our children to school by themselves and even go to an ice cream outside. After organizing community policing, in a year we reduced crime by 90%. Perhaps that is why the government decided to attack us and have me and 12 others arrested. They confined me to a prison and treated me like a dangerous animal. The government wants to break me down and make my imprisonment be a warning to those who rise up against such injustice. For all women, let nobody abuse you. Do not tolerate corrupt governments and do not accept discrimination or abuse from anyone. Women of Olinala, I kindly ask you to continue the struggle that started a year ago by our husbands and neighbors. I do not have to ask anyone for forgiveness, especially the government. I will walk out of prison with my head held high because I am not a criminal. And women of Mexico and United States also know that. History teaches us when success occurs is because sacrifices were made. And all women who sacrifice should always expect a brighter future. Freedom to Nestora Salgado. Free Nestora Salgado. Free Nestora Salgado. Free Nestora Salgado.
Our next speaker is Emily Wu Yamasaki. She's the New York City chapter organizer of Radical Women.
We've heard about several different struggles that I think are really making us fired up. Women all over the world are at the forefront of resistance against so many different struggles, and I can't name them all, but I just wanted to mention a small list, but they are rising up against capitalist war and occupation, sexual and gender violence, and attacks on the right to control our bodies, including but not limited to reproductive rights, assaults on public education, public housing, and access to health care, against police brutality, against mass incarceration, against workplace exploitation, and attacks on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people. You've heard about the battles of Nestor Salgado and Marissa Alexander, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. And Lisa's been also involved in Marissa's case. And as you've heard, Radical Women is actively organizing with our sister organization, the Freedom Socialist Party, around Nestora's case. We've also been on the core committee of the National Free Marissa Now Coalition and done a number of activities here in New York City and planning to do more. And Juanita Young contacted me in connection with Marissa's case and what we can be doing here in New York City to free Marissa. You've heard about the case of Al-Awda, and women ignite revolutionary struggles past and present. We're continuing to see the role that women play in Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Western and Eastern Europe, and right here in the U.S. As some of the struggles that Betty talked about when she talked about the history of International Women's Day. There are feminists organizing militant protests in Ukraine against Russia's invasion and for International Women's Day. There's a group called Femin, which originated in Ukraine, and they are radical feminists who do topless protests to protest Russia's invasion. Women were the backbone of the Chicago Teachers Union. They are the long-standing leaders of the globally recognized battle of teachers in Oaxaca, Mexico. And it is mothers of color, black moms, who have led the struggles to save the public schools right here in Harlem and nationally. That's a struggle that Betty mentioned Radical Women has been working on right here in Central Harlem, which is around the charter school takeover. Some of you may know that in the St. Nicholas houses, just right on the other side of where Freedom Hall is here, there was a playground that belonged to the projects there, was taken over by the Harlem Children's Zone in collusion with the Department of Education. They took away the playground from the community there. The Harlem Children's Zone put up a charter school, and of course a very small percentage of the children who live in those projects are allowed to go to that school. So that's just one small example of the collusion between the charter private profiteers like the Harlem Children's Zone and the real estate developers. Radical Women has been out on the streets of Harlem defending the community's right to public education and protesting the expansion of the charter schools. We've been out talking to local parents and teachers to identify their biggest concerns. And we've learned in talking with them that some of the main things they're really concerned about are where and what schools, school choice, quality of education, access to education, and also the treatment of their children in those schools. So what is it that our communities need to defend our communities effectively? We don't need the half-baked promises and initiatives from the Democrats. What am I talking about? Well, one of the things that first comes to mind is President Obama's recent speech launching his new initiative called My Brother's Keeper, which I see as a total sellout of black youth. There's been actually quite a critical response to this particular speech, even from some of the more mainstream commentators, because he just so blatantly left out a whole incorporation of the role of racism in that speech and in that initiative. And there with that speech, you know, with Trayvon Martin's and Jordan Davis's parents sitting right in the front row, I think you can't really get more tokenistic than that. But his was through this initiative and in many of the ways that he talks about, especially the black community pulling itself up by its bootstraps, it's a very moralistic and individualistic message that we just don't need. This new initiative completely leaves out women of color. Where are the girls? Where are the women? I think that we need to defend against this kind of message coming from Obama, which is all about privatizing the pain and privatizing the solution. But let's move on from Obama and bring it a little closer to home and talk about New York City's supposedly ultra-liberal mayor, Bill de Blasio. In talking a little bit about de Blasio, especially since Radical Women has been working on the issue of the charter school expansion in central Harlem, I wanted to just say a few words about this supposed controversy around the charter schools and de Blasio. The charters are schools that are publicly funded but are run by private corporations. Some of the best known charter chains in New York City are the Harlem Children's Zone and the Success Academy. From the point of view of the pro-charter movement, if you will, led by profiteers like Eva Moskowitz of the Success Academy charter chain, de Blasio turned down 9 of 45 charters for co-location that he inherited. Co-location meaning inserting a charter school into an existing public school. Okay, that's from the point of view of the pro-charter people. From my point of view, and those who want to stop the charters from taking over our public schools, de Blasio approved 36 of them. Regarding the new charters that applied, pro-charter constituents are up in arms that de Blasio turned down 3 schools. But the real fact to consider, I think, is that he approved 14 of them, including 5 new ones for Success Academy. So much for de Blasio's anti-charter campaign talk. On MSNBC's show called Morning Joe, Moskowitz claimed that Success Academy 4 in Harlem is the highest performing school in New York State in math in 5th grade. Diane Ravitch debunks this and states that on the 5th grade state math test, the students at Success Academy 4 are in fact number 8 in New York City and presumably even lower when compared to schools across the state. 4th grade math scores are number 54 in New York City. So the school's rankings are even worse in English, and it is definitely not the highest performing school in the state in any grade. The students at Success Academy are also not the most disadvantaged kids in New York City, as Eva Moskowitz's team claims. Success Academy 4 has almost none of the highest special needs students as compared to nearby Harlem public schools. I think it's long overdue time for all of the movements to break with the Democrats. And this is very much true. I think that, Lisa talked a little bit about Planned Parenthood, but the mainstream feminist groups have for way too many years thrown all their money and energy behind the Democrats, and it's got to stop. And I can say, as a supporter of the Durham-Lopez campaign in 2012, there are alternatives to vote for. There are socialist alternatives, like the Freedom Socialist Party ran for president. So what is the solution? I ultimately believe that we need a socialist feminist society. And it's not a coincidence that International Women's Day was established as a holiday by socialist women, as Betty talked about. So what is socialism? Socialism is the only humane alternative to capitalism. And as opposed to capitalism, which puts profits over people, socialism is an economic system that puts people's needs first. It would mean the factories that produce what society needs would be worker-owned and worker-controlled. Former Black Panther Assata Shakur, in exile in Cuba, in her book called Assata, says, anything that has any kind of value is made, mined, grown, produced, and processed by working people. So why shouldn't working people collectively own that wealth? And I agree. Right.